They had gone deeper than anyone else had before. Wayne Russell Jr. and his two buddies, John Wilcox and Danny Self, were on a dive that seemed impossible from the start. They squeezed their bodies and their gear through tight, jagged passageways, pushing further into an underwater cave that felt like it could swallow them whole. The water was thick with silt, their lights barely cutting through the murk. But then reality hit. Their oxygen supplies were running out. It was time to turn back. As they swam upward, the passage widened into a rocky chamber where the water cleared a bit, enough for Danny and John to realize something was wrong. Wayne wasn't with them anymore. It's hard to say if Wayne knew in his last moments that he wouldn't make it out of those dark, suffocating tunnels. What he probably didn't know was that he wasn't the first to end up as another story for this cave's grim history. But he would be the last. Just an hour outside Austin, Texas, lies a natural wonder that's captured imaginations for generations. In the heart of Wimberley, Hayes County, you'll find Jacob's Well, an artesian spring fed by the ancient Trinity Aquifer. For hundreds of thousands or even millions of years, water has flowed from this underground reservoir, making it one of Central Texas's most remarkable geological treasures. Jacob's Well's crystal clear waters flow directly into the nearby Cypress Creek, a lifeline for the surrounding ecosystem. The area where the spring feeds the creek is teeming with wildlife, from reptiles and amphibians to birds and woodland mammals. As well as being the source of Cypress Creek, though, one of the things that makes Jacob's Well so legendary is that it's also home to an extensive network of underground chambers. The Trinity Aquifer is replenished each year by rainfall, with surface water filtering through the region's limestone rock. Over time, this natural process has carved out a network of caves and channels deep beneath Jacob's Well. These underwater caves are now filled to the brim with water from the spring. A quick glance at Jacob's Well reveals the evidence of its hidden depths. Just beneath the water's surface lies a dark, cavernous opening, the well itself. It stretches so far into the earth that it's obstructed by not just the water, but the shadows. But there's also a grim secret hiding down there in the dark. For decades and through many scorching Texas summers, Texans and tourists have come to take a refreshing dip in the spring's waters. The temperatures within Jacob's Well tend to stay around 68 degrees Fahrenheit all year round. It's not exactly icy, but when Texas summer temperatures soar, even a few degrees cooler can feel like a welcome escape. But as inviting as the crystal clear waters might be, there's an unseen danger lurking below. Over the years, countless daredevils, both professional and amateur divers, have been drawn to Jacob's Well, eager to explore its mysteries. The cavernous entrance just beneath the surface is especially tempting, leading to an intricate network of underwater caves that stretches over a mile into the depths. To some bold-hearted travelers, exploring the hidden depths of Jacob's Well is the trip of a lifetime. And they might be right, just not in the way they intended. The cost of getting there can be a lot higher than just the price of plane tickets and renting scuba gear. Venturing into the waters of Jacob's Well can literally cost a person their life. You see, this popular swimming hole is actually one of the most dangerous dive sites, not just in the US, but in the world. The Houston Chronicle have reported that as many as 12 people have died after diving into Jacob's Well. Kent Maupin had been a seasoned diver and would often talk about his aspirations of diving into the tunnels below Jacob's Well. Beneath the surface of Jacob's Well lie 4 distinct chambers, each more challenging than the last. The 4th chamber is the most perilous. Its narrow passageways and hidden hazards have claimed the lives of those unprepared for its depths. Mark Brashear, a San Jacinto College student, assistant instructor and part-time employee at a dive shop, was a friend of Maupin. Both of them 20 years old when they decided to take their fateful trip to Jacob's Well. Kent and Mark joined a group of fellow divers from their hometown of Pasadena and set out for Wimberley, camping right beside Jacob's Well. In the early hours of September 9, 1979, just past midnight, the two friends along with a few others prepared for their dive. The entrance to Jacob's Well is a crevice in Cypress Creek. Its crystal clear waters inviting and spacious enough for safe diving. However, deeper below, the cave system becomes far more treacherous. Accessing its lower chambers requires divers to squeeze through a narrow, rocky passage, one that's already claimed the lives of 4 explorers. Yet rumors persisted that just beyond the passage lay a vast hidden underwater chamber. Despite the risks, Kent was determined to go beyond the safe point and explore further, hoping to reach the chamber. However, he had not done any preliminary planning, and he didn't have the kind of specialized equipment needed for such a dive. No backup lights, no safety line, and eventually no way back. At the narrow passage, Maupin and Brashear made a split-second decision to go for it. fueled by a mix of excitement and the allure of reaching the almost mythical hidden chamber. Without hesitation, Kent removed his oxygen mask, carefully backing into the tight, rocky crevice while pulling his air supply behind him. Moments later, Mark followed suit, each move driven by impulse and the thrill of the unknown. Another diver by the name of Joe Moy watched as Mark disappeared into the tunnel. He was taken aback. Nobody had discussed this before the dive. Acting on impulse like this seemed not only wildly irresponsible, but also dangerous. Both Kent and Mark had steel tanks. Meanwhile, Joe's was aluminum, and it carried more air. And with the other two heading deeper, their air consumption would be increased. Using his light, Joe attempted to signal and get Mark's attention, but the other diver didn't respond. Instead, Mark was looking down at his tank as he pulled it into the darkness after Kent. Joe noticed his own air supply was running low, and he was forced to leave, leaving his light at the entrance of the passage, hoping that they would follow it and find their way out. As he swam back up, he banged on his tank with a knife, hoping to alert the other two and get them to resurface. But there was no response. Moments after Joe reached the surface, the crystal clear waters of Jacob's Well darkened to a murky brown. It could have been a gravel slide deep below, or the desperate movements of two panicking divers stirring up silt. Whatever the cause, it became horrifyingly clear that the two missing divers weren't coming back. A wave of realization hit Joe. Kent and Mark had likely died down there. Jacob's Well is believed to have been discovered by early settlers around 1850, but its history stretches back much further. Many Native Americans likely knew of the spring for centuries, possibly even holding it in reverence. Naturally, they didn't call it Jacob's Well. That name wouldn't emerge until the 19th century. The first written mention of the spring appears in a book by Jacob de Cordova, one of Texas's earliest land agents. Some believe the spring was named in his honor. Others believe the name comes from the biblical story of Jacob, an Israelite who dug a well that never ran dry. Similarly, Jacob's Well in Texas was renowned for its constant flow of water, driven by the pressure from the Trinity Aquifer. This pushes the water to the surface, and it did so at quite a considerable rate for a number of centuries. In the first half of the 20th century, Jacob's Well was less of a tranquil spring and more of a natural fountain. The water surged to the surface with such force that diving into it was nearly impossible. When the well was first discovered, the pressure was so intense that water reportedly spouted as high as 5 feet into the air. Early settlers couldn't dive into it as many do today, but instead they relied on Jacob's Well as a local drinking fountain. Then, they later used it to power a sawmill. So why isn't Jacob's Well still gushing like a fountain, spraying 5 feet into the air at 170 gallons per second? Well, the answer lies in its source, the Trinity Aquifer, a massive underground reservoir of water stored within layers of rock and sediment. Spanning much of southwestern Texas, the aquifer feeds Jacob's Well and many other natural springs. However, extensive development in the area over the years has reduced the aquifer's pressure, which is why the well no longer spouts water with the same dramatic force it once did. While there's no fountain visible at Jacob's Well anymore, the upward current of the water is still going strong, and it can be witnessed as a ripple on the surface of the water. In the years since the waters at the well became calmer, the change not only attracted more wildlife to the spring, but also locals looking for a dip or a dive. Calmer waters made for easier diving conditions, although while that might have enticed some would-be divers, it is likely what drew them into a watery trap. While most visitors to Jacob's Well prefer to lounge around the edges of the spring, relaxing in the cold, crystal-clear water isn't all that exciting. Some are there for thrills, and what could be more exhilarating and terrifying than a head-first leap into the well's deep, dark cave opening? The nearby outcroppings provide the perfect elevation to free dive in the slim opening of the cave beneath the water's surface, some of them reaching as deep as 100 feet down against the upward current. Diving from the outcrop into the depths of Jacob's Well might sound like a thrill, but it's important to remember that this is one of the most dangerous diving spots in the world. Over the years, it's claimed the lives of at least 9 divers. While that might not seem like a staggering number, considering the sheer number of visitors to the area, it's remarkable that most haven't met the same fate. One such fortunate individual was Diego Adame, who came terrifyingly close to losing his life in Jacob's Well in July 2015. Diego, a 21-year-old from San Antonio, was free-diving deep into the well when he suddenly lost one of his flippers. Panic set in, and the strain of diving without proper equipment quickly caught up to him. Struggling to breathe and running out of time, Diego made a desperate decision. He cut off his weight belt and ditched it, kicking toward the surface with every ounce of strength he had left. Miraculously, he broke through just as his breath gave out. Reflecting on his death-defying ordeal, he later said, "For a split second I thought of death and myself dying that day." Even up above the water surface, Jacob's Well can still prove dangerous. The well itself, as in the entrance to the underwater caves, is about 12 feet in diameter. It's surrounded on all sides by rocks, and diving headfirst into it is a quick way to get yourself a nasty injury. There are plenty of tourists who visit the well having either not heard the gruesome stories associated with it or who simply don't scare easily. And even though the rules of Jacob's Well as implemented by the city of Wimberley forbid people from jumping off the rocky outcrop overlooking the opening of the well, many people still willfully ignore those rules. Even if you manage a perfect dive and avoid the jagged rocks, you are still plunging headfirst into a powerful upward current. Unless you're prepared for it or strong enough to fight against it, that sudden push in the opposite direction can throw you off balance, putting you at a serious risk of injury. Of course, there's getting a sprain or even a bad bone break from trying to do a flip off the outcrop, and then there is drowning in the deep dark caverns below. One of the biggest issues with scuba diving in Jacob's Well is just how narrow its passageways are beneath the surface. Some of them are so tight divers are forced to remove their oxygen tanks in order to squeeze through. Navigating the narrow passages of Jacob's Well's underwater cave system is a challenge reserved only for trained divers. These underwater chambers have spelled disaster for untrained explorers, and even some experienced scuba instructors haven't made it out alive. But we'll get back to that in a moment. Ever since the initial discovery of Jacob's Well, the underwater cave system below has been mapped by cave divers working for the Jacob's Well Exploration Project. Their exploration has revealed that the caves seem to consist of two principal conduits. One of those passageways has been measured at approximately 4,500 feet in length and reaches a maximum depth of 137 feet. Meanwhile, the second only extends to around 1,000 feet in length from the point where it diverges from the main conduit. Over the years, divers have successfully explored the first and second chambers beneath the well. The first of these chambers consists of a straight drop going down about 30 feet and then angling off for around 55 feet. This part of the cave is much brighter, illuminated by sunlight filtering through the clear water above. The light has allowed algae and other forms of aquatic life to thrive in this area, creating a stark contrast to the darker depths below. The second chamber, a long funnel stretching about 30 feet, features an opening that leads divers into the third chamber. However, the second chamber is where one of the more treacherous features of Jacob's Well can be found. Leading off to the side of the second chamber is a false chimney, around 8 feet below the surface of the water. This upward shaft appears to be a way out of the well, only to lead to a dead end. And this false chimney has trapped and claimed the life of at least one diver. Back in 1983, Richard Patton, a Southwest Texas State University student, drowned after swimming up that false chimney. Patton had hoped the chimney would lead back to the surface, only to realize too late that he wouldn't be making it out. And he was hardly the only victim lost to Jacob's Well forever, as a diving team in 2000 would also discover. The third chamber of the tunnel system is a small room with a floor of unstable gravel. In order to properly navigate their way around the chamber, divers must inflate water wings without stirring up silt or dislodging the gravel in the chamber. Kicking up silt or gravel doesn't just obscure a diver's vision, it can also pose a serious risk to their safety by damaging oxygen tanks and critical breathing equipment. The fourth chamber is perhaps arguably the most dangerous. Accessing it involves squeezing through a very narrow stone passageway. For years, it was believed that Kent Maupin and Mark Brashear, the two young Texans who drowned in 1979, lost their lives after becoming trapped in one of Jacob's Well's underwater caves, possibly at the tight entrance to the notorious fourth chamber. The theory remained little more than speculation until 2000, when an eerie discovery was made entirely by accident. In October 2000, divers Dan and Kathy Misiasek, along with their teammate Jim Price from the San Marcos Area Recovery Team, ventured into the elusive fourth chamber of Jacob's Well. Their mission was to capture video recordings of the area, a feat that few had accomplished. Once inside, they described the chamber as an untouched wonder, with stunning limestone formations and a floor entirely free of gravel. While they didn't head down there looking for human remains, each of the diving team knew there was a possibility they might find some. Still, surely the bones of all the people who drowned in Jacob's Well were washed away years ago, right? Well, yes, sure enough, the remains of Mark Brashear, one of the divers killed in 1979, had washed out of the well back in 1981 during an intense flood. However, no traces of Kent Maupin, his diving partner, had ever been recovered. That was until a little over 20 years later. During the dive in 2000, Misiaszek spotted the first signs of what was left of Kent Maupin. Peering through a keyhole opening in the floor of the fourth chamber, more than 100 feet below the surface, he noticed what looked like a pair of human femur bones. Making his descent into the tiny keyhole-shaped tunnel, Misiaszek could see a heavily corroded scuba tank with its various hoses still attached, as well as a wetsuit. Nearby, Misiaszek also found a human skull. There was one definite piece of evidence that pointed to the remains being those of Kent Maupin, a patch from Neptune's Locker Diving Association based in Pasadena, California, Maupin's hometown. Maupin and Brashear weren't the only ones who faced the perils of Jacob's Well back in '79 either. Don Dibble, a local dive shop owner with more than 40 years of diving experience, almost lost his life while attempting to retrieve the remains of the two young Pasadena divers. While leading the rescue team, Dibble became buried past his waist in the gravel at the bottom of the well's third chamber. Both his arms were pinned, and he couldn't pull on the safety line tethering him to the team above, nor use his oxygen tank to make noise and attract attention. Worse still, he only had 10 minutes of air left. Desperately struggling to free himself, Don Dibble faced a horrifying realization that he was moments away from running out of air. As the crushing weight of panic set in, his body began to spasm, his final involuntary movements. But in a twist of fate, those spasms caused him to lurch free from the gravel, offering a miraculous chance at survival. However, when being rescued by the other divers, Dibble took the regulator of a spare air tank and inhaled, and he accidentally swallowed some of the tank's air. It became trapped in him, and as he resurfaced, the air expanded, causing him extreme pain and rupturing his stomach wall. Still, having been moments away from dying, it's honestly amazing that he made it out, especially knowing that not everyone who ventures into Jacob's Well did. There's still a considerable amount of these underwater tunnels that are yet to be properly explored, as if the numerous diver fatalities weren't already a major deterrent to further exploration. The challenges don't stop there. With an average water depth of 120 feet and the well itself, along with the surrounding 80 acres being protected land, venturing deeper into the caves is made even more difficult. Despite the challenges and dangers, Jacob's Well holds a unique allure. It's believed to be the second largest fully submerged cave system in Texas, a remarkable feat in itself. And let's be honest, it's absolutely stunning to look at. Of course, its beauty is overshadowed by the haunting history of the lives lost within its depths. Speaking of that, brings us back to Wayne Russell Jr. and his two fellow divers. At 7:50 on February 26, 1984, the trio of divers entered Jacob's Well. Not all of them would make it back out. Wayne Russell Jr., 36 years old, was a member of the NSS cave diving section and had 12 years of experience. However, he wasn't a certified cave diver. His companions, John Wilcox and Danny Self, were both diving instructors. They were heading into Jacob's Well as part of a quick mapping dive to record the overall dimensions of some of the chambers and the caves below. But crucially, the three of them were also trespassing. They hadn't obtained permission from the landowner at the time, and so their ordinary preparation and planning may well have been hurried, without taking the time to make the necessary precautions. Relying on their collective experience and equipment, the three of them began their descent under the cover of night. A guideline was placed and secured 25 feet down, right at the bottom of the vertical shaft that led into and out of the underwater caves. The further they went, the more guidelines they secured on their way, using their knowledge of diving to try and plan ahead in case the worst should happen. Reaching the fourth chamber, they checked their air pressure. Both Wayne and John began preparing the next line to venture into the fifth chamber. That's right, Jacob's Well goes even deeper. The fifth chamber is a narrow passage that appears to lead to a larger, more open sixth cavern. However, no one has ever made it that far, certainly not without highly specialized equipment. The group proceeded toward the sixth chamber, John gathering up several pictures while Wayne used a 100-foot survey tape to measure these unexplored lower chambers. Knowing they wouldn't have much time or oxygen left, along with the worry that the air pressure would only get greater as they traveled deeper, Wayne signaled to John that it was time to go, so they proceeded to swim back toward the fourth chamber. It was only when Danny and John reached the third chamber that they realized Wayne was missing. When Danny signaled "Where's Wayne?", John responded by pointing to the tunnel behind them. He assumed that Wayne was either still working with his survey tape or putting his tank on after the narrow squeeze that leads from the fourth chamber back to the third. After all, Wayne had been right behind John when he returned to the fourth chamber. The pair assumed the experienced diver would catch up with them, but their rapidly dwindling air supplies wouldn't allow them to stay behind and wait. As John and Danny ascended to the surface, they paused at intervals for decompression, but there was still no sign of Wayne. Once they reached the surface, they waited anxiously, scanning the water for several minutes. Still nothing. At 9:15, realizing the gravity of the situation, they decided it was time to contact the local sheriff's office. The following day, Wayne Russell Jr.'s body would be recovered by a dive team from Wimberley. He was found in the 5th chamber, lying on the safety line with his oxygen tank completely empty, having drowned alone and trapped in the dark. Soon after, diving into Jacob's Well was eventually deemed so dangerous it was sealed off, with a metal grate placed around 100 feet down to prevent any further entrance into the underwater caves. Today, Jacob's Well remains owned and operated by the city of Wimberley, and several measures have been implemented to protect those who decide to visit. There's a strict limit to the number of divers permitted to enter the well at any given time. The city of Wimberley has also kept the well closed to diving during certain times of the year, both to allow aquatic wildlife to spawn and reproduce there, but also to prevent any further misadventures or drowned divers. Swimming in Jacob's Well is still allowed, although at the risk of the individual, and only between the hours of 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. Additionally, those hoping to swim in the well are now required to make reservations ahead of time, and these can only last for a maximum of 2 hours. Oh, and for those of you thinking of renting out some oxygen tanks and masks, hoping to head down Jacob's Well yourselves, recreational scuba diving is no longer permitted under the city of Wimberley's rules. The cool, clear waters of Jacob's Well remain a major draw, but for thrill-seeking daredevils, the spring carries an almost sinister allure. Free divers still gather around the opening, pushing the limits of their courage, even though a grate prevents access to the underwater tunnels below. Many descend several feet hoping to catch a fleeting glimpse of the shadowy caves. Even licensed veteran scuba divers, those who ventured deeper as part of the Jacob's Well exploration project, describe the well as a challenging and unforgiving environment, where every dive tests skill and nerve. What's considered to be a spot for summer fun and relaxation by some, a place for lounging in the cool water at the edge of the well to escape the Texas heat, is considered a gateway to a risky lifestyle for others. Jacob's Well is one of Texas's most fascinating yet dangerous natural wonders. Would you take a dive into its waters, or is this one natural wonder you would rather admire from a safe distance? Let us know in the comments. Now go check out Most Brutal Death in History, Gollum's Cave, or click on this video instead.